I was brought up in a household that was concerned with social issues. Um, my dad was a minister of the Unitarian Church, and when I was a teenager, I was involved in the church youth group, which considered itself very liberal, if not even left wing. And in terms of, we weren't so much interested in religion. We were interested in social and political issues. And at the time, it was even things like whether China should be recognized, and some things that really looked pretty silly in historical hindsight. And it was issues like birth control. These were the issues. It was even before civil rights became an issue. It was an issue of global peace. And so, there was a lot of anti-war sentiment, and war of any type. So that was my sort of family upbringing, where I was exposed to all these kinds of ideas, and not just exposed to them. I mean, I relished them. And then I went off to college, as they say in the United States. Went off to university, not really knowing what I was going to do, and it was there that I really sort of that the political dimensions became more and more prominent in terms of what I was interested in. And because I had a course with a professor who actually didn't even have his PhD, although at the time that didn't matter so much to me. I didn't think about it so much. But he was pretty left wing, and he was actually a PhD student at the University of Wisconsin, and actually following his advice, I ended up going to the University of Wisconsin for my PhD. I don't know whether he ever got one, but I did. And so I ended up going to the University of Wisconsin, interested in U.S. foreign policy, basically, because I was very anti-U.S. imperialism, and so therefore I was very interested in Castro's Cuba, a lot of issues in that context that the civil rights movement sort of blossomed, and that equally fascinated me. But I was not in the area yet of what I ended up doing in terms of my career. I was studying American history, and became, I wouldn't say dissatisfied with what I was learning. I just became more interested in, here was the United States intervening in all these countries in Central America, Latin America, Caribbean, all over the place. Cold War was going on, so I was very interested in. Suddenly, I became more interested in the countries in which things, where the United States was intervening rather than in the actual intervention. So it became. So I jumped from American history to initially to Latin American history and then African history, primarily because of I was fortunate to to be at the University of Wisconsin at the time. African studies was just suddenly becoming something that was recognized only and still at that point only in a couple of places in the United States and a couple of places in Britain, and beyond that, hardly at all. And so it was, in a sense, I didn't look at it this way, but in a sense, it was a wide open field. And I just happened to be fortunate at the time coming into it when a lot of things were possible. And in terms of what I've done with my career, I've demonstrated quite a bit about the types of things that are possible and have been possible. But the interest in Africa, in and of itself, wasn't initially a preoccupation or a concern. I was interested more in what you might call the other, not Americans, not Europeans, but the rest of the world, what was going on. So that was more my interest. And then at Wisconsin, I was fortunate to uh, have a cohort of friends and colleagues in graduate school uh, with whom I became very close friends, and with many of whom I continue to be extremely close friends to this day. Um, and they're people who have excelled in the field of African history. And so that means that a network that was spawned in graduate school has in effect uh, um, enabled me to be in contact with a very rapidly expanding field through people that are leaders in the field and who are close friends as well. And this has been, part of the experience that has been very enjoyable for me are these very long-standing relationships at the same time that it's research, and at the same time a lot of new people are coming into the sort of the network. And until today, um, it's the whole field is so big you can't talk about it as a network anymore. It's much, much, much bigger than that. And that in itself is exciting to have seen how an area that was so understudied now is such a central focus of a lot of research, and that a lot of really exciting and good things are happening. So I've been very pleased to have been part of all of that, of course. Well, as it happened, I went to the University of Wisconsin to study with a left-wing U.S. diplomatic historian by the name of William Appleman Williams, who wrote extensively on U.S. imperialism and on Cuba and U.S. intervention in Cuba and so on. I went to study with him, um, and that's what I did for my master's degree. But it was, I was fortunate to be in Wisconsin at a time when it had an unbelievably sterling history department with amazing figures that were. Uh, I came from a very naive background of. I wasn't a history major. I wasn't at a major university. I hadn't read a lot of history. And so to be in a place that had some unbelievable lecturers, I mean, two European historians in particular that were, they gave, one man, his name was Harvey Goldberg. He taught a course in the French Revolution. And he would start out every one of his lectures by, in this huge lecture hall, saying, please, will you, those of you who are not taking the course, please leave so that the people who are taking the course can get in. Every lecture he'd say that, of course, no one would move, and the aisles were just packed with people. And every lecture was like that. At the end of every lecture, he got applause like you wouldn't believe. It was like he would put on such a performance. Such an excellent lecturer. So there were people like that around, and me and the cohort that I joined, we went to these lectures. We weren't taking the courses. We went anyway. We went. We listened. We had to hear these guys. They were just fantastic lecturers, and it just happened that in the field of African history, we had two such people in the department that were just absolutely amazing. Philip Curtin, who was a pioneer and a real leader in the field of history, and really built the program at Wisconsin that I was fortunate to be part of, which still functions today. He was certainly one of the giants in the development of African history as a field, as a discipline. And he had recruited a Belgian scholar by the name of Jan Vansina, who was actually an anthropologist by training, and had spent, because of Belgian politics, had spent a good part of the time in what was then the Belgian Congo in military service until Congo became independent. And while he was in military service, he spent the time just learning African languages. So he ended up knowing about 10 or 12 African languages, and that and he ended up really being a pioneer in using oral data and traditions that he collected in the languages themselves about history and about what happened and what people thought about the past and this, that, and the other. And so he was a major theoretician in terms of method, in terms of oral history. So I just happened to be fortunate to be there at a time where I studied with both of them. And it was a dynamic duo. They were completely different in terms of their teaching style and in terms of their relationships with students and all kinds of things. The different parts of Africa that they focused on. It was great. It was to have. I was fortunate, and I really do appreciate that, because I can see that other people who are much more isolated because they're the only person in a department that's interested in the subject or something like that, where you don't have that type of community. And I was fortunate because I did have that type of community. The people that were studying with these two fantastic teachers and scholars who published a lot, both of them, so they were models of how you interact, how you mentor, how you encourage collaboration, how you, just amazing. And in fact, just the other day, in going through my papers that I'm trying to organize, that I'm organizing now, it came across seminar paper that I gave in Professor Vansina's seminar back in 1968. Yeah. Unbelievable. 75 pages long, the paper. Yeah. The seminar was just, it was astonishing. It was what we did. And he wouldn't let language get in our way. Somebody didn't know German, he'd translate what needed to be translated so they had access to the German. It didn't matter whether it was German or Portuguese or Arabic or whatever, he'd do it. So, language to him was nothing. I mean, it's a means of communication. So figuring out what's in the document and everything was just like reading a newspaper. And so finding my seminar paper and looking at it and reading it and saying, "Hey, this is pretty good," and that was a long time ago. Before it was actually, let me think, it was just before I went to Africa for the first time, and pretty good paper. I'm going to do something with it. But it was on believe it or not, on the trade of across the country that today is Chad. That's what it was. Long distance trade across Chad, between Lake Chad and what's now the Nile Valley. So, my gosh. And all of that really comes from being able to study with these two individuals who knew so much about Africa, were great historians, and were really great teachers. And all of their seminars, in those days, their seminars, they held their seminars in their homes and not at the university. And so it was, Vansina's, we had to deal with all these cats. There were so many bloody cats and cats everywhere. And Curtin, he always served sherry after the seminar was over for everybody. He served sherry. So we all drank sherry, even though none of us liked sherry. But that was the atmosphere. And it was pleasant because they showed us how they worked. We were in their studies. They told, what kind of shortcuts they took, how they organized their notes. Jeez, it was just amazing in terms of their willingness to pass on their knowledge. I guess that it was a great model because it's what I followed myself in my own career in terms of the way I've worked with students and the way I've worked with colleagues. Oh yeah, the paper that I wrote was on the long distance trade of Wadai and Darfur, which were two Muslim states in what's now Chad and Western Sudan, and connecting to the area that I've became a specialist in. And my discussion of trade and figuring out who the merchants were, what their origins were, and all of that whole methodology that's in that paper that I did under Vansina's guidance, because there's a lot of reference to German materials in there. When I didn't know German, and especially old script, and it didn't bother him, And so I was working on a topic where what was in the source, the information that I needed out of these contemporary German accounts of travelers and diplomats and whatever from the 18th and 19th century. What I needed from their texts was not deeply meaningful, sophisticated philosophical ideas or anything like that. It was more like, these are merchants. What were they trading? So it's a list of goods, It's prices if there are any, where people came from. So the dimensions of what I needed out of the languages that I didn't know were, quite concrete pieces of information, and um, I'm sure I was missing stuff because I didn't know the language that would have been useful to know, but nonetheless I could get a lot of material out of those sources. And as it turns out, there are a lot of those sources, and as it turns out to this day, no one has written about this topic, which sort of makes me laugh, because from what I read in my own work from 1968 is that it's publishable. So I might just do that. What the heck? And but in terms of before going to Africa and everything, well, when I first went to Africa, it was for language acquisition, and it was really before I had an idea for a thesis topic, and it was before I took this seminar. And this seminar and doing that paper is what I did. What I did for my PhD thesis, but not on that area and not on the focus of that paper, but it was the same methodology. I studied a trade route. I studied a bunch of merchants in the opposite direction from what the one that I had done for Vansina. Instead of across Chad, this was across northern Benin and Togo to Ghana. So it was the other direction. And so it was different commodities, it was different merchants, but it was the same methodology. And that's a good point. I will remember, because that if I do something with this one paper, that's the sort of thing I should say probably, and I should add to it for the context. Well, my first challenges was finding out what I was really interested in, and I don't know why. Maybe it's the same as everybody else in their late teens, and what you maybe it's the same. I don't ever remember thinking about anything like that way. I mean, it was always very clear I was going to go to university. What was I going to study in university? Well, I was very good at math, so I sort of thought I would follow my brother's footsteps and went into electrical engineering. And but I didn't even know what an electrical engineer was, to tell you the truth. And when I got into chemistry classes and stuff like that, I didn't do very well. I hadn't figured out that a lot of other students had figured out, which is that when you're in the lab, you know what the results are. The results are all set up so it's simple. Whatever experiment you're doing, you know the results. So they all worked backwards. They knew what the results they wanted to get and worked backwards and got A's. Me, no. I went in and tried to do it and didn't get A's. I got C's. I said, no. This isn't for me. But what was interesting was that I had to take courses in things like philosophy, and we were required to take a 2-year long course, believe it or not, wonderful in retrospect, which was 2 years basically beginning with, I guess, some Greek stuff and the Bible and things like this, but then reading great pieces of literature from the beginning to the end. And we did 2 years of this. We chronologically went through Beowulf, through Shakespeare, through and that was great. It was really great. That's where I read my Virginia Woolf. I can't say that I continue to do this, but that really opened my eyes doing all that, and then so I became interested in history. And then when I got to Wisconsin, the big challenge was I was unusual because everybody in those graduate history courses had all been history majors as undergraduates. I wasn't. I'd taken one American history course. It was my only history course. So here I was. And man, it was really clear from day one that I didn't know anything. No, I didn't know anything. I got into a seminar. It was an American history seminar, and it was on the period from 1790 to 1820. Oh my God, 1790 to 1820 U.S. history for a whole half year, I couldn't, when I started that, I couldn't have told you more than the names of 2 U.S. presidents that were that presidents during that period, because everyone knows Washington, certainly heard of Jefferson, but well, wow, they were into it. They knew everyone in the seminar before the seminar started knew the name of the governor of every one of the states during those periods, not just the president and vice president, the senators. So, so this was, I didn't know anything. I really was like, I didn't know whether I was going to survive. I did. And I wrote a fantastic paper, which I unfortunately have lost, um, which was on the history of uh, the construction of lighthouses off the New England coast during this period, 1790 to 1820, which is what happens. So a lot of lighthouses were built. And it was almost like building a database, although I didn't know what a database was then, so I wouldn't have thought about it that way, but it was going and figuring out where was every bloody lighthouse now? When was it founded? Was there any information? How did I find any more information? So it was a lot of fun and everything. I was missing one crucial, major crucial dimension to any history paper. And what I was supposed to have already learned as a history student in undergraduate. So I was a graduate student and I hadn't learned it. It was, so this is the history of lighthouses. But the important thing was, so what? So what? Why? Why would anyone care? What difference does it make? Wow, that was hard. I had to. I came up with something and I wrote it, and it was good. I did well in the seminars, not that, but I can tell you I was terrified. I didn't know what I was doing. I had to have a reason. I mean, I had to have why couldn't I just say, just tell me when all the lighthouses were built, whether they had a foghorn or not? Whether, really, some meat and potato basics, not any significance. So, anyway, I came up with a weak argument that related to significance, and it was all fine. But I really didn't know at that point yet what I was doing. I had, and so I was behind in certain ways. I felt that from my undergraduate days and my high school days. There were the whole chunks of things that I just simply had never learned and had never mastered, and probably, and I could, as I got older, I could see what those disadvantages were, because the kids that were not disadvantaged were the ones whose parents had been able to afford to send them to private schools, pay a lot of money, the routine. It works, you know. That's on the one hand, it looks elitist. On the other hand, you want the best education for your kids, you better pay for it. That means tutors. I mean, da da da. I mean, da da da. Oh, let's not kid ourselves, because that's the way the world works. And I hadn't had anything like that ever in my life. High school for me was a joke. Joke. I cheated on every exam I could. Wouldn't have been fun. It wouldn't have. It wouldn't have. That was the only challenge. was just using school as a place to play, because life was pretty boring. The most exciting thing was Dick Clark's American Bandstand on TV. That was the most. You have to say, if that's the height of excitement, then wow, it was pretty boring upbringing. Oh, I just suddenly discovered when I got into certain courses in these undergraduates that weren't anything related to anything, because I didn't know what I was doing or where I was going. That reading Plato was absolutely fascinating. And then, because I was at a small engineering school, I became a teacher's pet. In that, like Professor Blackburn, for example, who taught all the English courses. There's only one professor for all teaching. He and his lovely wife, they didn't have any children, and they invited me over for dinner many times. When I was just an undergraduate, like a second year student. And I go over to their house, and their house was filled with nice art, New Yorker magazine. Um, the way they talked, and they very clearly absolute New York intellectuals beyond anything, misplaced, but intellectuals beyond anything. Very well read, very just amazing people. I said, I looked around, and I said, this is the life I want. So I wanted to be a professor before I even knew what I wanted, what discipline. I'm telling you, I felt so comfortable in their house, and with all the paraphernalia of art objects, and really good art on the walls and things like this. Here in a little dinky town out in the middle of nowhere, but very sophisticated. I'd never known anything like this in my life. And I said, this is what I want. Books, books. and so actually there were about 3 or 4 professors. The philosophy professor was like that. I had friends who were my peers, but very few. I was hanging out with professors. In large part because of my political views and because of I was outspoken, because I worked with another student who's a French guy, and we did a movie a movie series. We're in the middle of nowhere, so we decided we were going to start bringing in all these movies, and this was Ingmar Bergman. This was last year at Marienbad. These are all the early arts films, the European. Oh, we brought these all in and showed these, for free. I don't know how we did it. We did it. So that's one reason the professors were, because we were doing these cultural things as well as political things. and so, this wasn't boring, you see. This wasn't boring. Chemistry was boring. Couldn't figure out why. I didn't know everyone cheated. I had to be a professor for decades to figure it out and say, that's how, because if you know how the experiment is supposed to come out, then you're going to do everything you can to fix everything so you're going to get the result. Jesus. It happened to me earlier with math, too, because when I first started taking algebra, I can remember that it's what I came to believe is be called insight. Because when I was in math, when you did get 7th grade, 8th grade, something like that, I was doing I was getting perfect. I was without doing homework or anything. I was in class. I was getting everything right, but I didn't understand what I was doing. I didn't understand. And then one day it clicked. Oh, it's backwards. It's backwards. If you just visualize and put it like that, then it isn't algebra. It's just adding and subtracting. And then you can make it a little more complex by multiplying. oh. And I can remember it hit me just one day. I was in class, I was doing it, and I said, it's backwards. That's the instructions they didn't tell you. And that was my PhD thesis, too. The thesis, when it hit me, when I was in Nigeria, I had my topic. I was working on a topic, but I didn't have it. It was not, goes back to the lighthouses, why? So I had, and then in one day, just in a moment, it hit me. I knew what I had. This is new. This is what is new. And it really related because I was in a situation where I was interviewing 3 old men, and all of my efforts at interviewing to that point had always been never to interview groups, always interview individuals. I was a Vansina student. Vansina students were all about methodology, about all this, that, and the other, about how the 2 people could influence each other, what happens when it does influence, you know what it is, you know that, but blah, 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 blah. oh, so much theory in my head, but I couldn't ask any one of the three old men to get out of the room while I talked with the other one, you know? So I had to talk with these three old men at once. And out of nowhere, I suddenly asked, well, you three, you're not related. You're not like, brothers or uncles or uncles or cousins, but you all have something that's similar. What are you? And they all laughed. And they all said, we're Agalawa. I said, what is Agalawa? I had, it's my thesis.